My father's holy mission that I dedicated my entire childhood to just landed him 25 years in federal prison for tax evasion and money laundering. And the worst part? I was the one who turned him in. For 18 years, I believed we were God's chosen family. Every Sunday, our living room transformed into a sacred sanctuary where dozens of faithful believers gathered for my father's blessing ceremonies. I watched him lay hands on people, speak in tongues, and collect thousands of dollars in divine offerings that would supposedly fund our family's missionary work around the world. I was so proud to be his daughter, the chosen vessel, the pure heart helping to spread God's word. Until last month, when I accidentally opened the wrong filing cabinet in his office and found bank statements showing 47 different accounts holding over $3 million. Money that was supposed to be feeding orphans in Guatemala was sitting in offshore banks in the Cayman Islands. That's when I realized our church wasn't registered anywhere. Our missionary trips were luxury vacations, and those faithful believers giving their life savings, they thought they were donating to a legitimate religious organization that didn't exist. My father had been running an elaborate tax fraud scheme disguised as a home church, and I had been his perfect little accomplice, collecting offerings with innocent eyes and a genuine smile that made people trust us completely. The FBI raid happened during our morning prayer circle. 30 agents stormed through our front door while my father was mid-sermon about the importance of sacrificial giving. The look of betrayal in our congregation's eyes when they realized the truth will haunt me forever. But what destroyed me wasn't losing my father to prison. It was discovering that everything I believed about my purpose, my faith, and my family was built on lies. My name is Emma, and until 6 months ago, I thought I was living the most blessed life imaginable. I'm 22 now, but this story really begins when I was 4 years old, and my father, Pastor David Matthews, received what he called the divine calling. We lived in a modest 2-story house in suburban Ohio. Nothing fancy, but my father always said God didn't need golden temples to work miracles. What made our home special wasn't the building itself, but what happened inside it every Sunday morning. The blessing ceremonies started small. Just a few neighbors who'd heard about my father's gift for healing and prophecy. My mother, Rebecca, would spend Saturday nights rearranging our living room, moving furniture to create space for folding chairs and setting up what my father called the altar, really just our coffee table covered with a white sheet and adorned with candles and a simple wooden cross. I was raised believing I was born for this purpose. My father would tell me bedtime stories about how God had chosen our family to be his vessels on earth, how the money people gave us wasn't really for us, but flowing through us to do his work around the world. "We are just the conduits, Emma," he'd say, stroking my hair. "God's holy conduits." By the time I was 10, our Sunday gatherings had grown to over 50 people. Word spread through the community about Pastor David's miraculous healings and prophetic visions. People drove from 3 counties away to attend our ceremonies. My father never advertised. He said God would bring the right people to our door, and somehow, he always did. My role in the ceremonies evolved as I grew older. At first, I just sat quietly in the corner, watching my father work what seemed like genuine miracles. Mrs. Henderson's arthritis disappeared after he prayed over her hands. Mr. Garcia's depression lifted after receiving a prophetic word about his deceased son. I saw tears of joy, heard testimonies of transformation, witnessed what I truly believed was God moving through our living room. When I turned 12, my father began incorporating me into the ceremonies. "Emma has been blessed with the gift of discernment," he'd announced to the congregation. "She can sense the spiritual needs of God's people." I would walk among the attendees during prayer time, and somehow, I always seemed to know exactly what to say. Looking back now, I realize my father had been coaching me, teaching me to read people's body language, to pick up on subtle cues about their struggles and desires. But at the time, I genuinely believed I had supernatural abilities. The offerings were always presented as voluntary donations to support our global missionary work. My father would speak passionately about the orphanages we were funding in Guatemala, the wells we were digging in Africa, the Bibles we were distributing in remote villages across Asia. He had photo albums filled with pictures of smiling children and grateful families that he claimed were the recipients of our congregation's generosity. I remember feeling so proud when people would hand me envelopes thick with cash, telling me how honored they were to support God's work through our family. Some gave their entire paychecks. Others donated inheritance money or sold family heirlooms to contribute to our cause. Mrs. Patterson, a widow on a fixed income, gave us her late husband's wedding ring because she said God told her it would help save souls. My mother handled all the financial aspects of our ministry. She kept meticulous records in a series of ledgers, tracking every donation, and supposedly documenting how the money was being distributed to various charitable causes. She would show me the books sometimes, explaining how important it was to be good stewards of God's money. "Every dollar has a purpose, Emma," she'd say. "We must account for every penny to the Lord." What I didn't know was that my mother was keeping 2 sets of books. Our family lived modestly, or so it seemed. We drove older cars, wore simple clothes, and my parents were always talking about sacrificing for the ministry. But there were little things that didn't quite add up, even to my teenage mind. The missionary trips my parents took several times a year, always without me, always to exotic locations that seemed more like vacation destinations than places that needed evangelical outreach. The expensive camera equipment my father claimed was for documenting our charitable work overseas. The high-end computer system in his office that he said was necessary for managing our global ministry operations. The safety deposit box key I once found in his desk drawer, which seemed odd for a family that claimed to live paycheck to paycheck. When I graduated high school, my father announced that God had called me to take a more active role in the ministry instead of going to college. "Higher education is a distraction from your true calling," he explained. "God has given you gifts that no university can teach." So I stayed home, becoming his full-time assistant. I managed the ceremony schedules, greeted newcomers, and helped collect the offerings. I felt so important, so purposeful. I was doing God's work, helping my father spread his message to anyone who would listen. Our congregation continued to grow. By my 20th birthday, we were regularly hosting over 100 people in our home, with overflow crowds gathering in our backyard during good weather. The offerings grew proportionally. Some Sundays we'd collect over $10,000 in cash and checks. I never questioned where all that money was actually going. I trusted my parents completely. I believed in our mission with every fiber of my being, until the day I accidentally discovered the truth that would destroy everything I thought I knew about my life, my family, and my faith. The first crack in my perfect world appeared on a Tuesday morning in March, 3 months before everything collapsed. I was organizing my father's office while he was out on one of his pastoral visits, when I knocked over a stack of papers from his desk. As I bent down to collect them, I noticed something strange. There were 2 different letterheads mixed in with the documents. One was familiar, Matthew's Family Ministry with our home address and the dove logo my mother had designed years ago. But the other was completely foreign to me, Divine Providence Holdings LLC, with an address I didn't recognize and a corporate seal that looked nothing like our simple ministry materials. When I asked my mother about it that evening, she barely glanced at the paper before dismissing it. "Oh, that's just the legal entity your father set up for tax purposes," she said, not looking up from her cooking. "Churches have to incorporate as businesses to handle donations properly. Very boring administrative stuff." Her explanation made sense, but something about her tone felt off. My mother had always been eager to explain every aspect of our ministry to me, treating me as a partner in God's work. This was the first time she'd ever brushed off one of my questions as too boring to discuss. The second red flag came a few weeks later during one of our Sunday ceremonies. Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who'd been attending for about 6 months, approached me after the service with tears in her eyes. "Emma, dear," she said, gripping my hands tightly, "I need to ask you something important. My grandson is getting married next month, and I was hoping to use some of the money I've been donating to help with the wedding expenses. Could you tell me how to request a partial refund from the Guatemala Orphanage Fund?" I stared at her, confused. "Mrs. Chen, I'm not sure what you mean. The donations go directly to support the children. They're not really refundable." Her face fell. "But your father told me that if I ever had a family emergency, I could request some of my contributions back, since the money hasn't been sent overseas yet. He said you keep it in a special holding account for 6 months before transferring it internationally." I had never heard anything about holding accounts or the possibility of refunds. In fact, my father always emphasized that once money was given to God's work, it belonged to the Lord and couldn't be taken back. I promised Mrs. Chen I would ask my parents about it, but when I brought it up at dinner, my father's reaction was swift and sharp. "Mrs. Chen is confused," he said firmly. "She's elderly and sometimes mixes up conversations. I never said anything about refunds. That would be inappropriate and goes against everything we believe about sacrificial giving." But I had seen the certainty in Mrs. Chen's eyes. She wasn't confused. Someone was lying, and for the first time in my life, I suspected it might be my father. The third incident happened in May, and it shattered my remaining innocence completely. I was helping my mother prepare for a ceremony when she asked me to retrieve some papers from my father's filing cabinet. She gave me the key and told me to look for the folder labeled Missionary Correspondence. And I found the right cabinet and the right drawer, but when I pulled it open, I was overwhelmed by the sheer volume of files inside. There had to be 50 folders, all meticulously labeled and organized. But as I searched for the missionary correspondence, I noticed that most of the labels didn't match anything I knew about our ministry. Cayman International Bank, account 4721, Switzerland Holdings, monthly statements, property investments, Costa Rica, Shell Company documentation. My hands trembled as I pulled out the Costa Rica folder. Inside were property deeds, purchase agreements, and photographs of a luxury beachfront villa. The documents showed that my father had purchased a $1.2 million vacation home using funds from something called Divine Providence Holdings, LLC, the same mysterious company I'd seen referenced months earlier. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was finding a folder labeled Photo Archive, Missionary Work, that contained the exact same pictures my father had been showing our congregation for years. The smiling children, the grateful families, the wells and orphanages we were supposedly supporting. Except these photos weren't taken by my father during missionary trips. They were stock photos purchased from an online photography website. I could see the watermarks and purchase receipts right there in the folder. Every single image my father had used to demonstrate our charitable impact was fake. I sat on the floor of his office for 20 minutes, staring at those receipts, trying to process what I was seeing. The children I had prayed for by name, the families I had felt connected to across the globe, the projects I had dreamed of visiting someday. None of them existed. They were just pictures my father had bought online to create an elaborate fiction. When my mother found me there an hour later, still sitting among the scattered papers, she knew immediately what had happened. "Emma," she said quietly, closing the office door behind her, "you need to understand something about the work we do." "What work?" I whispered. "None of this is real." She sat down beside me, her voice taking on a tone I'd never heard before. Cold, calculating, completely different from the warm, faithful woman I thought I knew. "The work is real, honey. It's just not the work you think it is. Your father has built something incredible here. We've created a sustainable income stream that allows us to live comfortably while providing people with the spiritual experiences they desperately need. Everyone wins." "Everyone wins?" I stood up, papers scattering around me. "What about Mrs. Chen? What about all the people giving their life savings to help children who don't exist? Those people are getting exactly what they pay for," my mother replied calmly. "Hope, purpose, community, spiritual fulfillment. Do you think they'd be any less happy if they knew the truth?" That's when I realized that my mother wasn't just complicit in my father's scheme. She was a full partner, and they had been planning to make me one too. The confrontation with my mother left me reeling, but what came next was even worse. Over the following weeks, I started paying attention to details I had always overlooked, and the scope of my parents' deception became horrifyingly clear. I began secretly documenting everything. During ceremonies, I would discreetly photograph the donation envelopes and record the amounts people were giving. I started a hidden notebook where I tracked who donated what, when, and what my father promised their money would accomplish. The numbers were staggering. In just 1 month, I documented over $47,000 in donations. Mrs. Patterson alone had given $8,000 that she believed was going to build a school in Honduras. Mr. and Mrs. Rodriguez had donated their entire tax refund, $12,000, after my father told them God had revealed to him that their money would save exactly 37 children from starvation. But the most heartbreaking discovery came when I started researching the stories my father told during his sermons. He had an incredible ability to weave detailed, emotional narratives about the people our donations were supposedly helping. He would describe specific children by name, tell stories about their families, even share updates about their progress in school or recovery from illness. I spent hours online trying to find any trace of these children, these families, these projects. What I found instead was that my father was stealing real stories from legitimate charity websites and repurposing them for our fake ministry. The little girl named Maria, who supposedly received life-saving surgery thanks to our donations. Her story was copied word for word from a Catholic relief organization's website. The village well that our congregation had funded in Kenya, those photos belonged to a real charity that had actually built that well 3 years earlier. My father wasn't just committing tax fraud. He was stealing the genuine humanitarian work of real organizations and claiming credit for it to manipulate our congregation's emotions and extract more money. The breaking point came during a ceremony in early June. A new family had started attending, the Johnsons, a young couple with a disabled son named Tyler. The little boy had cerebral palsy and needed expensive physical therapy that their insurance wouldn't cover. During the service, my father called them forward for prayer. As he laid hands on Tyler's head, he began speaking in what he claimed was a prophetic voice. "Thus says the Lord," my father intoned, his voice taking on the dramatic cadence he used for his divine revelations. "Your son shall be healed, but first you must demonstrate your faith through sacrificial giving. The Lord requires you to give your all. Sell what you have, and trust in His provision." Mrs. Johnson began crying, overwhelmed by what she believed was a direct message from God. Her husband pulled out his checkbook right there at the altar and wrote a check for $15,000. Money I later learned was their entire savings account, set aside for Tyler's medical treatments. "This will fund a miracle healing center in the Philippines," my father announced to the congregation as he accepted their check, "where children like Tyler receive the care they need through God's provision." I watched this scene unfold with growing horror. These people were giving up their disabled son's medical fund because they believed God was commanding them to do so through my father, and I knew with absolute certainty that their money would never help a single child anywhere in the world. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Tyler's trusting eyes, about his parents' desperate faith, about the medical treatments he would miss because of my father's lies. At 3 a.m., I made a decision that would change everything. I snuck into my father's office and photographed every document I could find: bank statements, property deeds, fake charity documentation, the stock photo receipts, everything. I uploaded it all to a secure cloud storage account and sent copies to an email address I created specifically for this purpose. But my father was more observant than I had given him credit for. The next morning at breakfast, he looked at me with an expression I had never seen before: cold, calculating, and dangerous. "Emma," he said quietly, "we need to have a conversation." He led me to his office and closed the door. On his desk were printouts of my cloud storage account activity and email logs from our home internet connection. "I monitor all internet activity in this house," he said, his voice eerily calm. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice you accessing my files and uploading gigabytes of data at 3 a.m? My heart was pounding, but I tried to maintain my composure. "I don't know what you're talking about." He turned his computer screen toward me. There, displayed in detail, was every file I had accessed, every photo I had taken, every document I had uploaded. "Here's what's going to happen," he continued, his tone becoming more menacing. "You're going to delete everything you uploaded. You're going to forget what you think you discovered. And you're going to continue being the faithful daughter I raised you to be." "And if I don't?" I asked, surprised by my own boldness. His smile was chilling. "Then you'll learn what happens to people who threaten our family's livelihood. Do you think you're the first person to figure out what we're doing? Do you think Mrs. Chen was really confused about that refund conversation?" My blood ran cold. "What happened to Mrs. Chen?" "Nothing permanent," he said with a shrug. "But she did have a very unfortunate fall down her basement stairs after she started asking too many questions. Broke her hip in 3 places. She's in a nursing home now, and her family decided it would be best if she didn't attend our services anymore." The implication was clear. My father was threatening me with physical violence, and he was admitting to having hurt Mrs. Chen to keep her quiet. "You're insane," I whispered. "I'm practical," he corrected. "This ministry generates over $500,000 a year in tax-free income. It's funded our house, our cars, our lifestyle, and your mother's medical treatments that insurance wouldn't cover. Did you think her cancer treatment was free? Did you think we could afford her experimental therapy on a normal salary?" This was news to me. I knew my mother had battled cancer 5 years earlier, but I had assumed our insurance covered her treatment. "Every dollar these people give us serves a purpose," my father continued. "It keeps our family healthy, comfortable, and together. What happens to them after they leave our house isn't my responsibility. I provide them with hope and community. What they choose to do with their money is between them and God." "You're stealing from them," I shouted. "I'm providing a service," he shouted back. "Do you see how happy these people are? Do you see the joy on their faces when they think they're helping children in Guatemala? I'm giving them purpose, Emma. I'm giving them meaning. The fact that the money goes to support our family instead of some foreign orphanage doesn't change the emotional value they receive." That's when I realized my father wasn't just a criminal. He was a sociopath who had convinced himself that his victims were actually benefiting from being robbed. "You have 24 hours to delete everything," he said, returning to his calm, threatening tone. "After that, I'll assume you've chosen to be an enemy of this family, rather than a member of it. And I treat enemies very differently than I treat daughters." I left his office knowing that my childhood was officially over. The man I had worshipped, the ministry I had devoted my life to, the faith that had defined my identity, all of it was built on lies, manipulation, and threats. But I also left knowing something else. I wasn't going to delete those files. I was going to find a way to expose the truth, even if it meant destroying my family in the process. The war between my father and me had officially begun. The 24 hours my father gave me felt like the longest day of my life. I spent most of it sitting in my room, staring at my phone, knowing I held the power to destroy everything my family had built, and everyone they had hurt. I kept thinking about Tyler Johnson and his parents, about Mrs. Chen and her nursing home, about the dozens of faithful people who had given their life savings to help children who didn't exist. But I also thought about my mother's cancer treatments, about the life we had built, about the fact that turning in my father would mean admitting I had been complicit in his crimes for years. By 6 p.m., I had made my decision. I wasn't going to delete the files, but I wasn't ready to go to the authorities either. Instead, I was going to confront my father one more time, give him a chance to come clean to the congregation himself, and try to find a way to make things right without destroying our family completely. I was naive enough to believe that was possible. That evening, we had one of our largest ceremonies ever scheduled. Word had spread about Tyler's prophetic healing, and over 120 people had packed into our house and backyard. The energy was electric. People were expecting miracles, and my father was in his element. I watched him work the crowd with a sick fascination, seeing clearly for the first time how masterfully he manipulated emotions. He started with small healings, headaches disappearing, back pain subsiding, anxiety lifting, things that could easily be psychosomatic, but felt miraculous to the people experiencing them. Then he moved on to the financial testimonies. He called forward several congregation members who shared stories about how their donations had been blessed. Mrs. Rodriguez tearfully described how she had given her tax refund to the ministry and then unexpectedly received a small inheritance from a distant relative, Mr. Patterson talked about how his business had improved after he started tithing to our cause. What the congregation didn't know was that my father had orchestrated both of those blessings. He had paid Mrs. Rodriguez's cousin to send her a check, making it look like an inheritance, and he had used his business connections to send new customers to Mr. Patterson's auto repair shop. These weren't divine interventions. They were calculated investments designed to encourage larger donations from other congregation members. As the evening progressed, I watched my father's manipulation reach new heights. He called the Johnson family forward again, announcing that God had revealed to him that Tyler's healing was imminent, but that the congregation needed to demonstrate their collective faith through a special offering. "The Lord has shown me a vision," my father declared, his voice booming across our packed living room. "There is a healing center in the Philippines where children like Tyler receive miraculous treatments, but they need exactly $50,000 to expand their facility and help 10 more children this year." The congregation gasped at the large number, but my father wasn't finished. "God has told me that if we can raise this money tonight, right here, right now, Tyler will walk normally within 30 days, but it requires all of us to step out in faith together." I watched in horror as people began pulling out checkbooks, counting cash, even calling family members to ask for loans. The Hendersons wrote a check for $8,000. The Martinez family contributed their daughter's college fund, $12,000. Even elderly Mr. Thompson, who lived on Social Security, hobbled forward with an envelope containing what I knew was probably his entire monthly income. But the most devastating moment came when Mrs. Johnson stood up, tears streaming down her face. "We already gave everything we had," she said, her voice breaking. "But I have my grandmother's wedding ring. It's been in our family for 4 generations. But if selling it could help Tyler walk..." She pulled the ring from her finger and placed it on the altar. The congregation erupted in emotional applause, praising her sacrificial faith. My father accepted the ring with solemn reverence, promising that her sacrifice would not be forgotten by God. That's when I snapped. I stood up from my usual spot in the corner, my hands shaking with rage and adrenaline. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to me. "Stop," I said, my voice barely above a whisper at first. Then louder. "Stop. All of you, just stop." My father's eyes locked onto mine, his expression shifting from surprise to warning to pure fury in a matter of seconds. "Emma," he said carefully, "perhaps you should go to your room. You seem upset." "I am upset," I shouted, my voice carrying across the silent room. "I'm upset because you're all being lied to. There is no healing center in the Philippines. There are no orphans in Guatemala. There are no wells in Africa." The congregation began murmuring, confused and concerned. Some people looked at my father for explanation. Others stared at me like I had lost my mind. "Emma is having a spiritual crisis," my father announced calmly, moving toward me. "Sometimes when God calls us to deeper faith, the enemy attacks through doubt and confusion." But I backed away from him, pulling out my phone. "The enemy isn't attacking through doubt," I said, my voice growing stronger. "The enemy has been standing at that altar for 18 years, stealing your money and lying about where it goes." I held up my phone, showing the screen to the congregation. "These are bank statements showing millions of dollars in offshore accounts. These are property deeds for luxury homes in Costa Rica and Switzerland. These are receipts for stock photos that my father has been using to fake missionary work for years." The room erupted in chaos. Some people were shouting questions. Others were demanding to see the evidence, and a few were already heading for the door. My father lunged toward me, trying to grab my phone, but I was ready for him. "Don't touch me," I screamed, loud enough that everyone could hear. "Just like you told Mrs. Chen not to ask questions before you pushed her down the stairs." That accusation sent shockwaves through the crowd. Mrs. Chen had been beloved by the congregation, and everyone knew about her mysterious fall and sudden departure from our services. "You're lying!" my father roared, abandoning all pretense of calm spiritual leadership. "You're a disturbed, ungrateful child who's trying to destroy everything we've built." "What we've built?" I laughed bitterly. "You mean what you've stolen, Mrs. Rodriguez? That inheritance you received after donating your tax refund? My father paid your cousin to send you that money to make other people think God was rewarding your faithfulness." Mrs. Rodriguez's face went white. "That's not..." "Miguel wouldn't..." "Call him," I challenged. "Ask him where the money really came from." While she fumbled for her phone, I turned to Mr. Patterson. "And those new customers who started coming to your shop after you began tithing? My father sent them. He has business connections all over the county, and he used them to make you think God was blessing your donations." The congregation was in complete uproar now. People were shouting, crying, demanding answers. Some were calling the police on their phones. Others were demanding immediate refunds. My mother appeared at my father's side, her face a mask of cold fury. "You have no idea what you've just done," she hissed at me. "You've destroyed everything. Our home, our income, our future. I hope you're proud of yourself." "I'm proud that Tyler might actually get the medical treatment he needs now," I shot back. "I'm proud that Mrs. Chen's family will finally know the truth about what happened to her. I'm proud that all these people will stop giving their life savings to fund your vacation homes." That's when my father made his final, fatal mistake. In front of 120 witnesses, he grabbed me by the shoulders and shook me violently. "You ungrateful little bitch," he screamed. "After everything we've given you, everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us?" The physical assault was the last straw for several congregation members. Mr. Henderson, a retired police officer, immediately stepped forward and restrained my father while his wife called 911. "David Matthews," Mr. Henderson said in his authoritative cop voice, "you need to calm down and step away from your daughter." But my father was beyond reason now. He struggled against Mr. Henderson's grip, screaming threats and accusations. "She's mentally ill. She's making everything up. Don't listen to her lies. Then you won't mind if we all take a look at these bank statements she mentioned, said Mrs. Martinez, reaching for my phone. For the next 20 minutes, my phone was passed around the room as congregation members examined the evidence I had gathered. The silence that followed was deafening. People who had given everything they had to support our ministry were seeing proof that their money had been stolen, their faith manipulated, their trust betrayed. When the police arrived, they found a room full of victims ready to file complaints and a mountain of evidence documenting years of fraud. My father was arrested on the spot, charged with tax evasion, wire fraud, and assault. My mother was taken in for questioning as a co-conspirator. As they led my father away in handcuffs, he looked at me one last time. "You've destroyed your own family," he said quietly. I hope it was worth it. I watched the police car drive away, carrying the man who had been my hero, my spiritual guide, and my greatest deceiver. Around me, the congregation was dispersing, some in angry groups demanding legal action, others in quiet shock, all of them forever changed by what they had learned. Mrs. Johnson approached me as I stood alone in our destroyed living room, still holding Tyler in her arms. "Thank you," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "I don't know how we'll ever trust again, but thank you for telling us the truth." As I looked around at the wreckage of our ceremony, our home, and our family, I realized that my father had been wrong about one thing. It was absolutely worth it. The aftermath of that Sunday night felt like living through an earthquake that never stopped shaking. Within 48 hours, our house had been seized by federal agents as evidence in a criminal investigation. I found myself homeless, familyless, and suddenly infamous as the daughter who destroyed her own parents. The FBI raid happened on Tuesday morning. I was staying at Ms. Rodriguez's house. She had offered me a place to sleep after the congregation dispersed Sunday night, when I saw the news vans pulling up to our street. Agent Sarah Chen, the lead investigator, called me directly. "Emma, we need you to walk us through everything you found," she said. "Your evidence is solid, but we need your testimony to understand the full scope of the operation." What I discovered during those interviews was that my family's crimes were even worse than I had imagined. The investigation revealed that my father hadn't just been running one fake ministry. He had been operating 12 different religious organizations across 4 states, each with its own fake charity mission and congregation of victims. The Costa Rica property was just the beginning. They found evidence of luxury apartments in Miami, a yacht registered in the Bahamas, and investment accounts worth over $4 million. My parents had been living a double life that I never could have imagined, jetting off to their secret properties while telling our congregation they were visiting orphanages and refugee camps. But the most devastating discovery came when Agent Chen showed me a folder labeled Insurance Policies. "Your father took out life insurance policies on several elderly congregation members," she explained, her voice grim. "He convinced them to name the ministry as the beneficiary, claiming it would ensure their donations continued helping children even after they passed away." My stomach dropped. "Mrs. Chen, her fall. We're investigating that incident now," Agent Chen confirmed, along with 3 other suspicious accidents involving congregation members who had recently updated their insurance policies. I spent the next week giving testimony to federal investigators, walking them through 18 years of manipulation, fraud, and what I now realized might have been attempted murder. The scope of my father's crimes was staggering. Over $6 million in stolen donations, tax evasion on an industrial scale, and potential involvement in the deaths of 4 elderly congregation members. The media attention was overwhelming. Our story made national news as an example of religious fraud in America. Reporters camped outside Ms. Rodriguez's house, trying to get interviews with the daughter who brought down the fake prophet. I stopped leaving the house altogether, watching my family's destruction play out on television from the safety of a borrowed bedroom. The congregation members' reactions varied wildly. Some, like the Johnson family, were grateful that I had exposed the truth before they lost even more money. Mrs. Johnson sent me a handwritten note thanking me for saving Tyler's medical fund and promising to pray for my healing from the trauma of discovering my parents' crimes. But others were furious with me for destroying their faith community, regardless of whether it was built on lies. I received dozens of angry voicemails and emails from people who blamed me for taking away their spiritual home, their sense of purpose, and their belief that they were making a difference in the world. "You didn't just expose your father," one former congregation member wrote. "You destroyed our hope. Some of us needed to believe we were helping those children, even if it wasn't real." The most heartbreaking response came from my extended family. My grandmother, my father's mother, called me 3 days after his arrest. "Emma," she said, her voice shaking with age and disappointment. "How could you do this to your own blood? Families protect each other. We don't destroy each other." "Grandma, he was stealing from people. He might have killed Mrs. Chen. That's for God to judge, not you," she replied firmly. "You should have come to family first. We could have handled this privately." That conversation made me realize that my father's capacity for manipulation and moral blindness wasn't unique to him. It was a family trait that had been passed down through generations. The idea that protecting family reputation was more important than protecting innocent victims was deeply embedded in our family culture. My mother's arrest came a week later, after investigators discovered her role in managing the multiple bank accounts and fake charity documentation. When they allowed me to visit her in jail, I barely recognized the woman who had raised me. "You have no idea what you've cost us," she said through the glass partition, her voice cold and bitter. "Your father built something incredible, and you destroyed it out of jealousy and spite." Jealousy? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Mom, he was stealing from people who trusted us. He might have murdered Mrs. Chen." "Mrs. Chen was asking too many questions," my mother replied matter-of-factly. "She was going to ruin everything for everyone. Sometimes difficult decisions have to be made for the greater good." That's when I realized my mother wasn't just complicit in my father's crimes. She was a true believer in his twisted philosophy. She genuinely thought that stealing from their congregation was justified because it allowed them to continue providing spiritual services to people who needed hope and community. The trial preparations revealed even more shocking details. Investigators found evidence that my parents had been planning to expand their operation internationally, setting up fake missionary organizations in Central America, where oversight would be even more limited. They had been grooming me not just to take over the domestic ministry, but to become the face of their global expansion. "They were going to make you the perfect spokesperson," Agent Chen explained. "Young, sincere, genuinely faithful. You would have been incredibly effective at raising money because you truly believed in the mission." The realization that my parents had been planning to use my genuine faith as a weapon against even more victims made me physically sick. I had been their secret weapon all along, the innocent daughter whose obvious sincerity would make their lies more believable. As the legal proceedings dragged on, I struggled with an unexpected emotion: guilt. Despite everything I had learned about my parents' crimes, despite the evidence of their manipulation and potential violence, part of me still felt like I had betrayed my family. But then I would think about Tyler Johnson getting the medical treatment he needed, about Mrs. Chen's family finally knowing the truth about her accident, about all the future victims who would be spared because the Matthews family ministry could never hurt anyone again. And I would remember that sometimes destroying something evil is the most loving thing you can do. 2 years have passed since that devastating Sunday night, and I'm still learning how to rebuild my identity from the ground up. When your entire sense of self is built on a foundation of lies, discovering the truth doesn't just change your perspective, it forces you to question everything you thought you knew about morality, family, faith, and your own judgment. The hardest lesson I've had to learn is that good intentions don't excuse willful blindness. For years, I told myself that I was serving God and helping people, but the truth is that I chose not to see the warning signs because acknowledging them would have been too painful. Mrs. Chen's confusion about refunds, the expensive equipment that didn't match our modest lifestyle, the mysterious business trips that never seemed to produce any documented charitable work. I noticed all of these things, but I explained them away because I wanted to believe in our mission more than I wanted to face reality. I've come to understand that this kind of willful blindness is exactly how most fraud victims get trapped. It's not that they're stupid or gullible, it's that they have emotional investments in believing the lie. The congregation members who gave their life savings to our fake ministry weren't just donating money. They were purchasing meaning, purpose, and community. Admitting they'd been deceived would have meant losing all of those things at once. That's why some of them are still angry with me for exposing the truth. I didn't just reveal that their money was stolen. I destroyed their sense of purpose and belonging. In their minds, I took away something precious and gave them nothing in return but the cold comfort of knowing they'd been victims. The experience taught me that there's a crucial difference between faith and blind trust. Real faith, I've learned, should be able to withstand questions and scrutiny. It should encourage investigation, not discourage it. When someone tells you that questioning their authority is a sign of spiritual weakness or lack of faith, that's not religion, that's manipulation. My father was a master at using spiritual language to shut down critical thinking. Whenever someone questioned his methods or asked for documentation of our charitable work, he would frame their concerns as spiritual attacks or tests of faith. He taught our congregation that doubt was the enemy's tool, that true believers should trust without questioning. But healthy skepticism isn't the enemy of faith, it's the guardian of faith. It protects genuine spiritual experiences from being exploited by people who would use them for personal gain. I've also learned that family loyalty has limits, and those limits should be defined by basic human decency. My grandmother's insistence that I should have protected my father regardless of his crimes reflects a toxic understanding of family bonds. Real love sometimes requires holding people accountable for their actions, even when, especially when, those people are family members. The most painful realization has been understanding how my genuine faith was weaponized against innocent people. My sincere belief in our mission made me an incredibly effective fundraiser, because people could see that I truly believed what I was saying. My father used my authenticity as a tool to make his lies more convincing. This has forced me to grapple with a difficult question. How much responsibility do I bear for the harm caused by crimes I didn't know I was committing? I was a victim of my father's manipulation, but I was also an unwitting accomplice in his fraud. The money people gave me with tears in their eyes, believing they were helping children in Guatemala. That money went directly into my family's offshore accounts. I've had to learn to live with the complexity of being both victim and perpetrator, both deceived and deceiving. Therapy has helped me understand that acknowledging my role in the harm doesn't mean accepting blame for crimes I didn't choose to commit, but it does mean taking responsibility for my willful blindness and working to make amends where possible. The legal proceedings resulted in my father receiving a 25-year federal sentence and my mother getting 12 years as a co-conspirator. The court ordered them to pay full restitution to their victims, but most of the stolen money had already been spent or hidden in accounts that investigators couldn't trace. The Johnson family recovered about 30% of what they'd donated. Mrs. Chen's family received a settlement from our homeowner's insurance, but no amount of money could undo the trauma of her accident. Perhaps the most important lesson I've learned is that exposing evil, even when it destroys everything you thought you knew about your life, is always the right choice. The temporary pain of losing my family, my home, and my identity was nothing compared to the permanent damage my father would have continued causing if I had stayed silent. Sometimes love requires destruction. Sometimes protecting innocent people means betraying guilty ones. Sometimes the most faithful thing you can do is refuse to have faith in faithless people. These are hard lessons, but they're true ones. And truth, I've discovered, is worth any price you have to pay for it. Today, I'm 24 years old, and I'm writing this story from my small apartment in Denver, Colorado, about as far from my childhood home in Ohio as I could manage to get. It's been 2.5 years since that devastating Sunday night, and I'm finally ready to share what happened next. The first year after my parents' conviction was the darkest period of my life. I struggled with severe depression, survivor's guilt, and what my therapist diagnosed as complex PTSD from years of psychological manipulation. There were days when I wondered if exposing the truth had been worth the complete destruction of everything I had ever known. I was essentially homeless for 6 months, staying with Ms. Rodriguez until the media attention became too overwhelming for her family. Then I moved between temporary housing provided by victim services organizations, trying to figure out how to build a life when you have no family, no money, no education beyond high school, and no work experience outside of religious fraud. The turning point came when Agent Chen connected me with a nonprofit organization called Truth Recovery, which specializes in helping people who've escaped from high-control religious groups and cult-like situations. Through their program, I received counseling, job training, and most importantly, I met other people who understood what it felt like to discover that your entire reality had been constructed by manipulative people with hidden agendas. I learned that my story wasn't unique. Religious fraud is more common than most people realize, and families like mine operate across the country, using faith as a weapon to exploit vulnerable people. Meeting other survivors helped me understand that I wasn't crazy, weak, or gullible. I was a victim of sophisticated psychological manipulation that would have fooled most people in my situation. With Truth Recovery's help, I earned my GED and enrolled in community college, studying social work with a focus on cult recovery and religious trauma. I discovered that I had a natural ability to help other people process their experiences with spiritual abuse, probably because I understood the unique shame and confusion that comes with realizing you've been deceived by people you trusted completely. Last year, I started working part-time for a legal aid organization that helps victims of religious fraud navigate the criminal justice system and recover stolen assets. It's heartbreaking work. Most victims never recover their money, and many struggle with their faith for years after being betrayed by religious leaders they trusted. But it's also incredibly meaningful work. When I sit with a 70-year-old woman who gave her retirement savings to a fake missionary organization, or help a young man understand that his prophet's demands for sexual favors weren't actually messages from God, I know that my experience, as painful as it was, has given me the ability to help people in ways that most counselors and lawyers simply can't. The most surprising development has been my relationship with some of our former congregation members. About 18 months ago, Mrs. Johnson reached out to me through the Victim Services Coordinator. Tyler had made remarkable progress with his physical therapy, funded by the money they recovered from my father's accounts, and she wanted to thank me again for saving his medical fund. We started meeting for coffee occasionally, and through her, I reconnected with several other families from our congregation. Not all of them were ready to forgive me for destroying their spiritual community, but many had come to understand that I had saved them from losing even more money and faith to my father's lies. These relationships have helped me process my own guilt and shame about my role in the fraud. Hearing Mrs. Johnson say that she doesn't blame me for my father's crimes, that she's grateful I found the courage to speak up when I did, has been more healing than years of therapy. I still struggle with trust issues and have a complicated relationship with organized religion. I haven't stepped foot in a church since that Sunday night, and I'm not sure I ever will. But I've found other ways to connect with the spiritual part of myself that my father couldn't corrupt, through meditation, nature, and service to other people who've been hurt by those who claim to speak for God. My parents are both still in federal prison. I haven't spoken to either of them since my mother's trial, and I don't plan to. They've both written me letters over the years, my father asking for forgiveness and claiming he's found true faith in prison. My mother still insisting that I destroyed a good thing out of spite and jealousy. I don't read their letters anymore. I've learned that forgiveness doesn't require maintaining relationships with people who refuse to acknowledge the full extent of the harm they've caused. If you're reading this story and recognizing elements of your own experience, if someone in your life is using faith, family loyalty, or cultural tradition to silence your questions and doubts, please know that you're not alone, and you're not crazy. Trust your instincts. Ask the hard questions. Demand transparency and accountability from people who claim to speak for God, or tradition, or family honor. And remember that sometimes, the most faithful thing you can do is refuse to have faith in faithless people. Your truth matters. Your voice matters. And you deserve better than being someone else's victim, no matter how much they claim to love you.